Hajime Kashimo, a character who first appeared in chapter 158. Rapidly, Jujutsu Kaisen fans already liked his character due to his coolness, but also because of his strength. He was the strongest, at least going off of the Culling Games points in his colony, and the fact that he was searching for Sukuna, a sorcerer from 400 years ago who appeared in the Culling Games calling everyone else weak and only looking for Sukuna. Obviously, this is going to draw attention from us, and rightfully so. This was our introduction to Hajime Kashimo. Right off the bat, we could already tell he is very strong, but how strong exactly? Luckily for us, after his introduction, he had 2 fights which gave us a ton of info on him. Enough for us to be able to answer the question of, how strong is Hajime Kashimo? That's what we will be doing today. The first part that we will be covering is just his past, basically like his background or lore. About 400 years ago, Hajime Kashimo seemed to have been bored of fighting because everyone that he was fighting was too weak. This aligns with what he says in the Culling Games in chapter 158, which is that everyone has been weak so far, and that he wants Sukuna. So it's the same thing 400 years back, where Kashimo was just much more powerful than everyone else, so he was searching for a worthy opponent. He asked Kenjaku, "Who is the strongest sorcerer you know?" Kenjaku says, "Sukuna." Kashimo, without hesitation, says he'll entertain whatever Kenjaku has to say so he can fight Sukuna. Something people sort of seem to ignore is that Kashimo isn't really fixated on Sukuna. Like, he doesn't want to fight Sukuna just because it's Sukuna, but more so he just wants to fight the strongest person possible because he's tired of being way stronger than everyone else, tired of being alone and wanting recognition. The same recognition and answer he gave all of the warriors he had killed before. That's why in chapter 185, which is when Hakari arrives to save Panda, all of that CE from Hakari got Kashimo excited. And it's the same reason why Kashimo was just roasting Panda for being extremely weak. Like Sukuna said, a hierarchy not based purely on strength is born. There's more to this mentality, but this is how the strongest in Jujutsu Kaisen live. This allows them to surpass their limits. Another example of this is how Gojo mocked people for being weak. He even says to Jogo that he's so weak. Sukuna does the same thing. He just gets on people for being weak. So this idea of living by strength isn't something new to Jujutsu Kaisen. And to mention the obvious, this is a shonen manga, so obviously power is going to be important. Now, for the second part of this video, we'll just be going over his arsenal. A thing that stands out when we talk about Kashimo is the nature of his cursed energy. Panda describes it like Fushiguro's Nue. Kashimo's cursed energy is like a current of electricity. He's in a constant state of electrification. This causes Kashimo to be almost impossible to defend against. There are people that can resist this cursed energy trait. For example, Hakari. Kashimo states it barely affects him. The reason being that his cursed energy output is high enough that he can ignore it. That's how someone can counter Kashimo's cursed energy. Kashimo's most deadly ability in his arsenal by far are his lightning strikes. These lightning strikes can't miss without the need to cast a domain. These strikes though need to be charged up. He can't just spam them. The strikes themselves just kind of spawn from Kashimo. Sometimes it seems like he guides it with his hand, but it's not necessary for him to use it with a hand sign or aim with the hand sign. With his staff, he can also retrieve cursed energy as electrical feedback with a chosen route and strike his opponents through this. I'm not quite sure if he could do this with any item he chooses to amp with his cursed energy. We haven't seen him use it with any other item. Maybe it's only possible with that staff, or even if he can do it with items that he amps with his cursed energy, they may also have to be capable of handling an electric current. This doesn't matter much though, but it's still interesting to think about the extent of his abilities. Now onto Kashimo's cursed technique, Mythical Beast Amber. It gives Kashimo the ability to surpass beyond the human realm. The curse technique reconstructs Kashimo's flesh in order to manifest this new strength. He converts this using curse energy. We see him able to expand his arsenal, shooting from his mouth and hands, an increase of speed and strength, and his reaction speed is quicker due to the increased electric signals in his brain. And that's all for Hajime's arsenal. Obviously, he's a very good hand-to-hand fighter, but I think we all know that, so we're just gonna move on to the next part. Now that we have a firm understanding of Kashimo's arsenal, we're gonna go over Kashimo's feats and answer the question of how strong is Hajime Kashimo. For Kashimo, we have 2 fights that are pretty informative over how strong he is, and I'm sure there won't be any stones unturned. We'll have a pretty good gauge over his strength and who he can/can't beat. The first fight we'll be analyzing and breaking down is Kashimo versus Hakari. At the start of the fight, they're feeling each other out, each having their moment of superiority due to not having complete knowledge over each other. For example, Kashimo saying Hakari was caving and Hakari just snaps back. The first significant feat was Kashimo's lightning taking off Hakari's arm. Once he does that, we see Kashimo saying he's gonna pile on Hakari and kill him. Hakari catches him off guard twice. Once by still counterattacking even though his arm just got blown off, and the second time by using RCT and punching Kashimo. Kashimo was able to block this punch though. At this point, comparatively, Kashimo has dealt much more damage than Hakari due to the lightning strike. When it comes to hand-to-hand combat, they both drew blood, but there wasn't a clear difference of who was better as of now. Hakari uses domain again, and during the round, he is not unkillable. During the round, it was very apparent Kashimo was superior to Hakari in hand-to-hand combat. After the round is done, Hakari hit jackpot again, and Kashimo turns up the volume. They proceed to beat up a container in between them, and Hakari throws a big punch without making contact with Kashimo, but to the door of the container, blowing Kashimo back. Despite this, Kashimo was able to counterattack and hit Hakari on the head with said door, and then hits him a second time, scraping off a bunch of skin from Hakari's face. On top of that, Kashimo directs a lightning strike to blow up Hakari's head, but isn't successful due to Hakari's ridiculous RCT. Hakari admits he almost died. So far, Kashimo hasn't received any hits from Hakari ever since the second jackpot. Hakari figures out Kashimo's lightning needs a charge, which means he can't spam it. So it seems like Hakari was waiting for Kashimo to use the lightning so he can go all out. Kashimo was dominating Hakari hand to hand, but once Hakari saw Kashimo use the lightning and there wasn't gonna be another one for a while, he starts speeding up and dominating Kashimo. Even here though, within 8 seconds, Kashimo is able to use the electrical feedback and strike Hakari with lightning through his stomach. Kashimo confident that the fight was over, he was wrong. Hakari's luck prevails and is able to use another domain expansion and hit another jackpot unexpectedly. Hakari compliments Kashimo, saying he's never faced death so many times in a day before. Throughout this fight, the one so far on the back foot is clearly Hakari. The only time where Hakari was clearly superior was during the last 8 seconds of the second jackpot. The fight continues and Hakari shifts his domain coordinates over a body of water. In the water, Kashimo's CE either gets released until he runs out, or he shuts off his CE until he can get back on land. Kashimo's able to land on some cursed spirits, so he wasn't dropped instantly to the water. Hakari unleashes an attack which kills basically all of the curses, so Kashimo would drop in the water. There is one left and Hakari kicks Kashimo off it into the water. Kashimo was able to react and block the kick, but it was still too powerful. Kashimo's CE starts leaking out and creates a gas with the water that sleeps Hakari, and he falls into the water. Kashimo thought once again the fight was over. To be able to counter the gas he produced, you need a higher level of RCT to remove the toxin. Luckily for Hakari, his RCT is fully automatic and he's able to wake up and punch Kashimo in the face. He hits Kashimo 2 more times and he contemplates if he should use domain or not. He sees the electric shock and the scalding water as a threat to him, so he decides to keep on attacking. He taunts Kashimo while doing so, and Kashimo responds by grabbing Hakari's arm and blowing them up. Kashimo, after he did that, had run out of CE, but Hakari was still standing and punches Kashimo. Hakari's arm was blown off in the explosion. He made a binding vow, sacrificing his arm so the rest of him could live. So without this binding vow, Hakari would have died. And that isn't my opinion, this is just what Hakari outright states. On the other hand, Kashimo had specifically targeted his arm just in case the blast didn't kill him, so that Hakari couldn't cast another domain since he was headed for increased probability. This obviously means Kashimo saw Jackpot Hakari in that instance as a threat. In the end, they both settled for a tie. This fight was extremely close. Both of them were clearly on the ropes throughout the fight. I would say Kashimo has the edge though, since each time Hakari was vulnerable and Kashimo had landed a fatal hit, he never followed up and kept getting surprised by Hakari's extreme luck. On top of that, Hakari did a dirty yet smart move by throwing Kashimo into the water, which put Kashimo in an incredibly disadvantageous position. If they were to rematch, I think Kashimo would win due to the fact that Hakari has no counter to the lightning strike, and that strike cannot miss. So Kashimo, knowing how Hakari can get so lucky and come back from fatal blows, he won't just sit back and think he won. He'd finish the job. Regardless of this, I think everyone would agree these guys are on the same level. That being said, this gives us good grounds to determine Kashimo's strength. He's on par with someone who's a part of the heavy hitters, meaning he's definitely going to be able to contend with someone like Yuta and Maki, especially if you believe Hakari is the strongest out of the heavy hitters. I'm not going to dig too deep into that though, that can be its own video, but independent of what you believe when it comes to the heavy hitters, Kashimo is definitely on this caliber of sorcerers. Kashimo's a strong hand-to-hand fighter. We've seen him be able to contend with the likes of Hakari, whose only arsenal is throwing hands, but on top of that, Kashimo's best and most dangerous feature to almost everyone in the verse is his lightning strike. He could definitely be big trouble for someone like Yuta and Maki, since their healing is definitely not anywhere on the same level as Hakari. That alone should demonstrate how OP Kashimo actually is. I think at this point you guys have already grasped that, so let's move on and talk about the other fight Kashimo has, which made a lot of people switch up on Kashimo, and they put him on the fraud list, which I think is unfair, and we're going to break that down now. The fight I'm talking about is Kashimo versus Sukuna. This was hyped up ever since we got introduced to Kashimo, yet it was a one-sided fight that ended in 2 chapters. Most people thought Kashimo was going to play a significant role in defeating Sukuna, and when he didn't, people were disappointed and started calling him a fraud. Unfairly though. For context, the Sukuna Kashimo is fighting, apart from the obvious injuries, like him missing his hand, eye, and just his body being completely beat up, he can't heal rapidly, and lost Mahoraga. Despite this, he's still strong enough to fend off the likes of Kashimo, a guy who's on par with the heavy hitters. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that even though the Sukuna is weakened, he's still, pretty strong. And this isn't a walk in the park. Kashimo in base rushes Sukuna and attempts to hit him, but Sukuna easily is able to block and dodge Kashimo's attacks. Kashimo activates his curse technique after these 2 attacks and is able to punch Sukuna in the face. He wasn't able to react to Kashimo. Now, some people think this is a feat for Kashimo. I disagree. Sukuna was caught by surprise from the sudden change of speed. This is furthermore supported by him reacting to Kashimo's blast and blitz attempt after that punch. Don't get me wrong though, this Kashimo has faster travel speed than Sukuna, but it's not fast enough to make the difference. Sukuna is still able to dodge and get out of the way before Kashimo can hit him with something. In the same instance, Kashimo hits Sukuna again. This is also not a feat for Kashimo. Kashimo's missed attack blew the ground up, and the debris made Sukuna close his eyes, so obviously he's gonna get hit if he can't see Kashimo. Now this part of the fight is the only thing that gives us some meat to bite on. After Kashimo hits Sukuna, he uses his lightning strike and Sukuna transforms before it hits him. I think this is an indication that this lightning strike would have given Kashimo the win against that weakened Sukuna, or done some big damage. The reason being is we know the lightning cannot miss. Sukuna can't heal rapidly, and he was forced into using his transformation. The transformation is important because when they talk about it in the context of Sukuna healing himself, which to me implies he needed to use the transformation because it's his best option to survive. If he could have handled the lightning strike, he would have used his transformation just like he was doing before, even when he was getting punched around by Kashimo. There was no need. But with the context of him being extremely beat up and his healing nerfed, I think it's reasonable to say that the lightning would have done some major damage to Sukuna. The rest of the fight after Sukuna transforms is just absolutely unfair. Not only is Kashimo glazing Sukuna, calling him perfection, Kashimo's just getting blitzed and thrown around like a ragdoll. But this doesn't mean Kashimo is a fraud. This is the strongest guy in the verse. That doesn't take away from Kashimo's strength. Now, if you want to say it was a letdown and you expected him to do more, that's fair, but it's just unfair to start depreciating Kashimo's strength off his fight with Sukuna. With this fight though, we can draw some interesting stuff like, for example, Curse Technique Kashimo would have just annihilated Hakari when they fought. Since Curse Technique Kashimo is like a blitz level faster and has a whole new range of arsenal, so it's definitely not crazy to have CT Kashimo above the heavy hitters. Kashimo's main problem would just be dealing with domain. He'd have to kill people before they use their domain, because what the hell happens to Kashimo when domain gets activated? Does he just disappear and die because his CT is shut down? So that's definitely a concern, but stats wise, I think he's easily above the heavy hitters with his Curse Technique. And that covers pretty much everything with Kashimo's strength. In base, he's on the same level as fighters like Yuta, Hakari, and Ryu. With his Curse Technique, his stats are much higher, so he gets into the high end of those fighters, or maybe even a tier above them. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. If you have any suggestions, make sure to let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one.